So our today's topic is expenditure method of measuring national income. That is how to measure the GDP or GNP of a country through expenditure method. So far we have discussed the value added method and income method. In the income
Yes,
method,
sir.
we add up the factor income earned by all the factors of production of a country and the income earned by the government enterprises during each year. That becomes the national income. Today we will take the next side of the coin. Another side, one side is income side and another side is expenditure side. We know that whole income of a country is spent on goods and services. So what is income? That is always equal to expenditure. The whole income of a country, the income of a country is equal to the expenditure of the country. Expenditure of the country. So expenditure method measures, this method measures the national income or GDP of a country, on the basis of final expenditure. On the basis of final expenditure. On the basis of final expenditure made by all the sectors of an economy during 1 year. So this method, according to this method, we can measure the national income or GDP of a country on the basis of final expenditure made by private sector, government sector, and rest of the world sector. We have generally three sectors. One is private sector, government sector, and thus we
Business
add up
sector.
the expenditure made by all the sectors of an economy during 1 year. That becomes our national income.
Income.
Yes. This method measures the GDP or national income of a country on the basis of final expenditure made by all the sectors of an economy during 1 year. Final
1 year.
expenditure is equal to the gross domestic product at market price. The sum of final expenditure. Sum of final expenditure. Sum of final expenditure is always sum of expenditure, sum of final expenditure by all sectors. By all sectors in an economy is always equal to GDP. Is always equal to GDP. GDP, that is, we can say this national income is identically equal to national expenditure, and which is identically equal to GDP of the country. GDP of the country. So the final expenditure of whole country is always equal to gross domestic product at market price. This method is also called, it has so many names, also called income disposal method. Income disposal method, or sometimes it is also called consumption and investment method. So under this method, we add up, we make the aggregate of consumption and aggregate of expenditure of the economy, investment of the economy, and get GDP. That is why we call it consumption investment method. Consumption investment method. Thus, we discussed the final expenditure of the country. What is final expenditure? Final expenditure is the expenditure made on final goods and services. That we will
Services.
later on. What is final expenditure? Final expenditure is expenditure made on final goods and services, not intermediate goods and services. So under this method, this is very important, we classify the final expenditure of a country into 4 categories or into 4 groups or categories. First of all, we discussed that we measure here final expenditure of the economy made by all the sectors. Then we discussed that all aggregate final expenditure of the economy is always equal to GDP at market price. So we can say
Yes.
one man's income is another man's expenditure. That is why we confidently say that national income of a country is equal to national expenditure, which is equal to GDP. So according to this method, we classify the whole expenditure of the country into 4 categories, into 4 heads, into 4 groups.
Yes, sir.
So when we add up these 4 expenditures, 4 final expenditures, we get the GDP. We get what are these? These are number 1. These are number 1, private final consumption expenditure. Private final consumption expenditure. Private final consumption expenditure. We can say it is C. That is, we can say private consumption.
Yes, sir.
Briefly, हम ये कह सकते हैं it is private consumption. Private consumption. तो इसी को हम कहते हैं private final consumption और private consumption expenditure. Briefly, हम ये भी कह सकते हैं it is private consumption or that is the consumption made by the private sector. Consumption made by the private sector on consumer goods and services. Number next is government final consumption expenditure. Government final consumption expenditure, that is G. Then we have private investment expenditure. Private investment expenditure. जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर है वो 2 तरीकों के एक्सपेंडिचर्स करता है. One is they spend their money on consumption goods and services. Another expenditure they made on investment goods, on capital goods. So this is private investment expenditure. This is I. That is I. And the 4th one is net exports. Net exports. Net exports. Or we can say X minus M. That is exports minus imports.
Yes, sir.
Exports minus imports.
Import.
Thus we can say our GDP is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M.
Minus M.
C plus I. What is C? Private consumption.
What is I? Consumption.
What is I?
Government consumption.
That G is government. I
private
investment. Basically हमें यहाँ ये मैंने थोड़ा ये इसकी जो सीक्वेंस है वो चेंज की. अगर ये प्राइवेट कंजप्शन है फिर लिखेंगे हम प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर, प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर, दैट इज आई। फिर थर्ड है गवर्नमेंट फाइनल कंजप्शन, कंजप्शन एक्सपेंडिचर, वो क्या होता है? जी, दैट इज जी। फोर्थ इज एक्सपोर्ट्स, नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स, नेट एक्स,
M.
हाँ ये x माइनस m है, x माइनस m है। सो वी हैव 4 टाइप्स ऑफ एक्सपेंडिचर्स इन ए कंट्री। प्राइवेट लोग कितना कंजप्शन पे इन्वेस्ट करते हैं, एक्सपेंडिचर करते हैं, वो कितना इन्वेस्टमेंट पे एक्सपेंडिचर करते हैं ऑन कैपिटल गुड्स। सो दिस इज एक्सपेंडिचर मेड बाय प्राइवेट सेक्टर ऑन कंजप्शन गुड्स।
Consumption goods. Yes, sir.
जनरली हम घर में भी 2 किस्म के एक्सपेंडिचर्स करते हैं। इसी तरह जो भी प्राइवेट सेक्टर है एक इकोनॉमी का, whole private sector, they made 2 types of expenditures. One is on consumption and another is on investment. That is first on consumption goods and another on capital goods. So expenditure on capital goods is investment. Then we have government purchase of goods and services, जिसको हम कहते हैं, that is government purchase या government expenditure. Government consumption goods पे भी खर्च करता है और इन्वेस्टमेंट भी करता है। So here we sum up this. ये G में हम भर देते हैं। Last है rest of the world sector, they make expenditure in the form of imports and foreign countries make expenditure here in the form of exports.
The exports.
Net of exports. Net of exports.
Exports.
Clear हो गया? Net of exports. Now we will classify or explain them one by one. One by one, yes. One by one. First क्या है? First underline करना है. Private consumption expenditure. Private consumption expenditure. C.
Yes.
It refers to the expenditure made by private sector on final or on consumer, on consumption, on consumer goods and services. It is made by private households. It is made by private households, non-profit organizations serving the society. It is made on consumer goods.
Yes.
These on consumer non-durable goods, consumer durable goods, etc., etc. So, what type of expenditure it is? It is the expenditure
made by private households.
Private sector.
Yes, sir.
On final consumption goods. On final consumption goods and services. It is the expenditure made by private sector on final consumption goods and services. ठीक है? It refers to the expenditure on final goods and services made by individuals. It is expenditure made by individuals.
Of private sector.
Expenditure made by private individuals. That is private sector में क्या क्या आता है? Private individuals और क्या है? Households. That is private households. Non-profit organization. Non-profit organization. हाँ. Non-profit organization आपको पता है? Those organizations who serve the people without earning profits. NGOs. Non-government organizations like Yatim Trusts, Banatas, etc., etc. Charitable trusts. etc. So it includes expenditure on all types of consumer goods as well as consumer services, whether it is durable goods or non-durable goods. Durable goods or non-durable goods are like milk, butter, rice, wheat, vegetables, fruits, etc. Expenditure made on non-durable goods. Durable goods are like expenditure made on furniture, on television, on washing machine, on fridge, on this a car for personal consumption, etc. So it includes all expenditures made by private sector on consumption goods, only consumption goods, not capital goods. Clear? So it
Yes, sir.
is the expenditure made by private sector on final consumption goods and services. It is the expenditure made by private individuals, households, non-profit organizations, etc. ठीक है, खाली जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर में जो भी आता है वो कितना खर्चा करते हैं किस पे? कंजप्शन गुड्स पे, कंजप्शन गुड्स।
Yes, sir.
ये हो गया सी, दिस इज सी। सेकंड इज प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर, प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट expenditure, private investment expenditure, that is I.
Yes, sir.
That is I.
I.
It is the expenditure made by private sector on capital
investment
goods.
On investment goods, on capital goods, on capital goods like machinery,
Yes, sir.
like tools, like equipments, construction of factories, construction of thermals, fixed as well as inventory investment. So it is the expenditure, or it refers to the expenditure made by private sector on capital or investment goods. Investment goods on capital goods or investment
Goods.
It includes the expenditure on, it is the expenditure on, it is the expenditure on machinery, tools, factories, firms, etc. Okay? It includes both fixed investment and inventory investment. It includes both expenditure in fixed investment as well as inventory investment.
Yes, sir.
Inventory investment. समझ आया? समझ आया? ये पॉइंट समझ आया? ओ कहाँ खाक समझ आया? ये लास्ट पॉइंट कहाँ समझ आया आपको? इसमें फिक्स्ड इन्वेस्टमेंट भी है. It is expenditure on investment, expenditure on capital goods, investment goods. Fixed investment as well as inventory investment. Fixed investment is हम machine लाते हैं, टूल लाते हैं, फैक्ट्रीज बनाते हैं, फर्म्स बनाते हैं, कॉर्पोरेशन बनाते हैं, बिल्डिंग्स बनाते हैं, जो भी इसमें आता है दैट इज फिक्स्ड इन्वेस्टमेंट. इन्वेंटरी इन्वेस्टमेंट होता है चेंज इन स्टॉक्स. चेंज इन स्टॉक्स. अगर लास्ट ईयर मेरे पास जो क्लोजिंग स्टॉक था, फॉर एग्जांपल आई हैव 500 यूनिट्स, तो इस साल मैंने ओपन जब किया तो उसमें 1500 यूनिट्स थे. It is closing stock minus opening stock. Yeah, है ना?
Yes.
So there is investment of 1000, gap of 1000 units. ये investment है. ये investment है. ये investment है. हाँ, gap है ना 1000 units का.
Yes.
जो मैंने नए बनाए. जो मैंने नए बनाए. ठीक है? इन्वेंट्री होता है चेंज कितना हो गया, कितना मैंने बेच दिया, कितना नया बनाया, तो इसमें से कितना हुआ, तो लास्ट पे कितना मेरे पास जो ओवर प्रोडक्शन है, स्टॉक है, वही होता है इन्वेंट्री इन्वेस्टमेंट, जो फिनिश्ड गुड्स लास्ट पे रहते हैं।
Yes, sir.
इन्वेंट्री इन्वेस्टमेंट अगर आप लिखोगे, इट मेजर्स, इट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन क्लोजिंग स्टॉक एंड ओपनिंग स्टॉक, इस तरह हमें पता है। द स्टॉक दिस इट इंक्लूड्स
Yes, sir.
stock of finished goods, stock of semi finished goods, and stock of raw material. Raw material कुछ बचा है, हैं? Finished goods बचे हैं,
Yes.
हैं? तो semi finished goods बचे हैं, तो ये इन्वेस्टमेंट में आता है। So this is whole private sector expenditure. Private sector expenditure is distributed into two categories. ये है private sector का सारा जो उसने खर्च किया है, on consumption goods, on capital goods और investment goods. थर्ड क्या है हमारे पास, गवर्नमेंट गवर्नमेंट
Consumption expenditure.
गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर, गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर, गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर और गवर्नमेंट कंजप्शन एक्सपेंडिचर है। क्या हम इसको कहते हैं, गवर्नमेंट फाइनल कंजप्शन एक्सपेंडिचर, गवर्नमेंट फाइनल कंजप्शन
Consumption
एक्सपेंडिचर,
expenditure.
दैट इज जी। इसको हम
Yes, sir.
जनरली कहते हैं गवर्नमेंट परचेज ऑफ गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज, गवर्नमेंट परचेज ऑफ गुड्स एंड
Goods and
सर्विसेज, यस, गवर्नमेंट परचेज ऑफ गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज, जी।
services.
इसमें क्या क्या आता है, एक साल में गवर्नमेंट ने कितना कंजप्शन पे लगाया और इन्वेस्टमेंट पे लगाया, इसमें दोनों चीजें हमने बात की। यहाँ हमने प्राइवेट सेक्टर के लिए हमने अलग अलग इनको कैटेगरीज बनाई, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट के लिए हमने एक ही कैटेगरी देखी है। इट इंक्लूड्स बोथ गवर्नमेंट्स expenditure on consumption goods as well as government's expenditure on investment
good.
Investment.
refers the expenditure by the government on both consumption goods and capital goods.
Investment goods.
It is the
Investment
capital goods.
expenditure made by government,
Refers to the expenditure.
made by government on both consumption goods and investment goods or capital goods
Yes.
during a year, during a year, during a
Yeah.
it refers the expenditure on final goods and services by the government. क्या क्या है इसमें, expenditure on purchase of goods and service, expenditure, it refers to the expenditure made by government on final goods and services, like expenditure on purchase of goods for consumption and expenditure on purchase of goods for investment. So it includes
Yes.
both, ये इसमें दोनों आते हैं, it includes both expenditure on purchase of
Consumption goods,
of consumption goods and expenditure made on investment.
purchase of investment goods.
It includes both expenditure on purchase of consumption goods and expenditure on capital goods. Expenditure on capital goods by the government.
Yes, sir.
By the government. ये होता है G. This is G. Well, the third is net exports.
Yes, sir.
या foreign expenditure कितना है, net exports. Fourth one is net exports. Net exports. Net exports. That's X minus M. X minus M. Net exports is the difference between net exports is the difference between value of exports and value of imports. Value of exports and value of
Imports.
imports during a year. During a year. During a year. Export is the
Year.
expenditure by foreigners on domestic goods. Exports. Export is the expenditure of foreigners on domestic goods, and imports is the expenditure. Imports is the expenditure on foreign goods. On foreign
Foreign goods.
goods and services. Foreign goods and services.
Services.
Oh, yes. So exports are added and imports are deducted.
Deducted.
Deducted. Yes.
And imports are deducted. So this is all about the categories of expenditures made by an economy during 1 year. So sum total of these expenditures, we can say GNP at market price now becomes C, first category, plus I plus G plus X minus M.
X minus M.
Yes. So what is this C? C is private consumption.
Yes.
I is private investment.
Private investment.
And G is
Government
expenditure.
X minus
X minus
M is
M
net exports.
Exports
Net
minus
export.
imports or foreign expenditure. So this is all about the expenditure method.
Method.
क्या रह गया? What is final expenditure? It is the expenditure made on final goods and services in a year. Final expenditure is the expenditure made on final goods and services. Final goods are those goods which are ready for final consumption. आप छोटा एक क्वेश्चन भी लिख सकते हो. What is final expenditure? What is final expenditure? What is final expenditure? It is the expenditure on final goods and services. On final goods and
Services.
final goods are, what are final goods? ये हमने लिखा है. Final goods are those goods which are ready for
Final consumption.
final consumption and use, which are ready for final consumption and use. Which are ready for final consumption and use. Yes. तुम चीज यम तैयार आसन
Final consumption के लिए.
consumption खातिर, final consumption, and do not require further process of, and do not require further this process of production. Do not require further process of production. जिनको अब और production नहीं करनी है, further process of production.
Yes,
That is, they have crossed the production boundary. अब वो production boundary में नहीं है. So expenditure made on final consumption or final capital goods, that is called final consumption. In India, final consumption method is used to estimate national income in secondary sector. So this method is generally used this final consumption in India, final consumption method is used here in India. In India, final consumption method or final expenditure method. Final expenditure method is used to estimate income in secondary sector. To estimate income in secondary sector. Secondary sector पता है आप कौन है? इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर. इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर में इनकम कैलकुलेट करने के लिए हम ज्यादा फाइनल एक्सपेंडिचर मेथड यूज करते हैं. Yes. So this is all about the what expenditure method.
Expenditure.
Yes. और एक चीज मैं आपके साथ डिस्कस करूंगा. That is very important. Now, as students of economics, if I will put whole national income as Y मैंने रख लिया सारा नेशनल इनकम मेथड के हिसाब से, according to income method we adopt the income of all the sectors of an economy. उसमें हमने ये क्लियर किया कंपनसेशन ऑफ एम्प्लॉइज है, ऑपरेटिंग सरप्लस है और मिक्सड इनकम जो भी इकोनॉमी का है वो बन गया नेशनल इनकम. ये बन गया नेशनल इनकम. अगर नेशनल इनकम Y है, if whole national income is equal to Y, और Y is equal to हम ये भी कह सकते हैं रेंट, वेजेस, इंटरेस्ट एंड प्रॉफिट. ठीक है, क्लियर?
यस सर.
हाँ. अब मैं फॉर एग्जांपल आपकी इनकम की बात करूंगा, मेरे इनकम की बात करूंगा. अगर हम इंडिविजुअल एक आदमी के इनकम की बात करूंगा, अगर मेरा इनकम Y है, फॉर एग्जांपल my income is equal to Y. This Y is for example equal to 1 लाख रुपए. मैं मंथली 1 लाख रुपया लेता हूँ. ठीक है. If I am earning 1 लाख रुपीस पर मंथ इनकम,
per month,
ये बराबर है Y. वो 1 लाख is equal to Y. यहाँ Y है, Y M में लिखूंगा.
यस सर.
मंजूर Y. ठीक है. ये 1 लाख. तो मैं 1 लाख जब लेता हूं तो मैं क्या करता हूं इस 1 लाख से? शाबाश. क्या मैं करता हूं 1 लाख से?
वही
घर के लिए चीजें लाता हूं, रोटी कपड़ा ये वो हो गया कंजप्शन पे लगाता हूं. और कुछ मुझे बचता है इससे. जब मैंने कंजप्शन खत्म की महीने में तो उसको क्या करता हूं? सेव करता हूं. So my whole income is equal to consumption plus saving. उसको मैं कंज्यूम करता हूं, कुछ सेव करता हूं. समझिए, बात समझिए. जो ये सेविंग है, ये मैं इसको मैं क्या करता हूं? जो ये सेविंग है,
इन्वेस्टर.
हाँ, मैं इन्वेस्ट करता हूँ. कहाँ इन्वेस्ट करता हूँ? बैंक में रखता हूँ.
बैंक में.
खुद इन्वेस्ट में फैक्ट्री नहीं खोलता हूँ, तो मैं ये बैंक में रखता हूँ. सो एस इज ऑलवेज, अगर मुझे 1 लाख रुपया महीने में मिल गया, 50,000 या 60,000 मैंने खर्च किए घर में कंजप्शन के लिए, तो 40,000 मुझे बच गए, वो मैंने बैंक में डाल दिए. सो माई होल सेविंग इज इक्वल टू इन्वेस्टमेंट विच इज इन द बैंक. सो एस इज इक्वल टू आई. मैं ये भी लिख सकता हूँ ना, वाई इज इक्वल टू सी प्लस आई.
Yes sir.
C plus I. So this is income. This is income of the economy. It is equal to rent, wages, interest. किसी ने rent कमाया, किसी ने wages कमाए, किसी ने interest कमाया, किसी ने profit कमाया, किसी ने, ये सारा हमने ऐड किया तो Y बन गया. सारे लोगों का जिस तरह, जैसे एक आदमी का हाल है वही सारे लोगों का हाल. जिस तरह एक आदमी अपने इनकम को 2 हिस्से करता है, कंजप्शन एंड इन्वेस्टमेंट. Same is the case here. This Y is always Y for the economy. Y of the whole economy is always equal to C plus I. C plus I. अगर खाली प्राइवेट सेक्टर है, अगर खाली गवर्नमेंट सेक्टर नहीं है, गवर्नमेंट सेक्टर, सो सारा जो नेशनल इनकम होता है वो कंजप्शन प्लस इन्वेस्टमेंट होता है। अब गवर्नमेंट का रोल भी है, तो सारा इनकम गवर्नमेंट इकोनॉमी का बनता है प्राइवेट कंजप्शन, प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लस गवर्नमेंट ने कितना परचेज किया एक्सपेंडिचर, और फॉरेन सेक्टर में हमने कितना खर्च किया। सो दिस बिकम्स द होल जीडीपी ऑफ ए कंट्री। जो हमने यहाँ लिखा, जीएनपी ऑफ ए कंट्री इज इक्वल टू सी प्लस आई प्लस जी प्लस एक्स माइनस एम, बिकॉज ऑफ द फैक्ट एज पर इनकम मेथड all incomes are equal to GNP. So this whole income is always equal to C plus S. Consumption
S.
plus saving. This saving is always equal to S. I. Saving is always equal to I. Or income
Investment.
C plus I. When there is only private sector. जब गवर्नमेंट भी होता है तो सारा इनकम इकोनॉमी का होता है C plus I plus G plus X minus M. जब ये फॉरेन सेक्टर भी आज, ये हम सर्कुलर फ्लो ऑफ इनकम में पढ़ेंगे ना, सो दिस इज एक्सपेंडिचर मेथड।
Expenditure method.
इनकम, द GNP, GDP, GNP of a country, national income of a country is always equal to private consumption, private investment or private consumption expenditure, private investment expenditure, government purchase on both consumption goods and capital goods, or government is spending or expenditure on consumption as well as investment plus foreign expenditure कितना है। क्लियर हो गया? So
Yes, sir.
domestic yes. So this is all about the expenditure
Expenditure method.
method. Okay, कल हम
Method.
इसके precautions लिखेंगे, हैं? थोड़ा
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir.
2-5 मिनट लगेंगे तो कल इंशाल्लाह वो होगा। ठीक है? ओके।
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir.
यस, ये भी
Allah.
व्हाट इज फाइनल एक्सपेंड। खुदा हाफिज़।